I have the honor today of introducing our guest speaker, Cody Green. Cody is a motivational speaker and mental health advocate and the founder of One Opportunity Hiring, a local nonprofit that helps individuals with criminal backgrounds gain employment. Cody is a recovered drug user, a reformed convict, and a content creator with over 1 million followers on his TikTok account. He is also diagnosed with undifferentiated schizophrenia. We are excited to have Cody speak to us today about his experience with schizophrenia, mental health in college, and the importance of mental health awareness. This speech will be followed by a Q&A session, so please prepare questions if you would like. Please join me in welcoming Cody Green.
I want to thank everyone for allowing me to come here and speak to you guys today. I have done quite a few speaking events. This is actually the first local one I've been able to do. Shortly after I started doing speaking events, COVID happened. So I haven't really been able to do anything locally, and I love being able to come advocate on a more local level, especially to people who are in the same age range I was when I started having my psychotic break and all of my worst symptoms. So as Kayla mentioned, my name's Cody. I am a TikToker, which is an awesome thing to say as a career choice. I also do motivational speaking, and I even work full-time as a way to just keep busy and keep my mind busy. I found that, especially with my symptoms and my mental health, the best thing I've been able to do for myself is be constantly busy. So I appreciate you guys giving me something to do and a way to keep my mind going and be able to advocate for not only college students, but people that are struggling with mental health. Some of you, if you've ever seen my content, might know I actually had my psychotic break in college. So most people don't realize that schizophrenia tends to develop between the ages of 18 and 25 for males. Not only did I suffer a psychotic break, but my mother is actually also diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. So schizoaffective disorder is a combination of both schizophrenia and a mood disorder, and for her it was schizophrenia and bipolar symptoms. She was diagnosed in the early 2000s, and things have gotten so much better mental health-wise since then. She was misdiagnosed as bipolar early on, and so now that she has a proper diagnosis, she was able to get proper treatment. That was a huge part of my story and my advocacy, was not only being someone diagnosed with schizophrenia, but actually being the family member of someone who is severely mentally ill. Fortunately enough for me, because of her diagnosis, when I started showing symptoms, it didn't take very long for me to get a diagnosis. Not everyone is that lucky. I will kind of start by talking about specifically what it was like going through my psychotic break in college, how my symptoms started, and then what I wish I would have known back then when it came to getting help and being able to get treatment. Because I went almost 2 years without getting any help or any treatment, and the main reason for that was because of how stigmatized mental illness is, specifically schizophrenia. I don't know if anyone here has ever seen a news story or TV show or movie about schizophrenia, but I think everyone could agree that they're not always painted in the best light. Unfortunately, when we do see someone in the news with schizophrenia, it's them suffering a psychotic break and hurting themselves or others. So I had this really cool opportunity where I got internet famous for telling jokes about my schizophrenia, and I was allowed to put a new face to the illness. People could think of schizophrenia and think of that weird long-haired hippie kid on TikTok and not the episode of a TV show they watched where the person with schizophrenia murdered a bunch of people. Because although the media tends to paint schizophrenia as a really dangerous disorder, the truth is people with schizophrenia are more likely to be the victims of violent crimes than to commit violent crimes. Same with most mental illnesses. It is also very common for people with schizophrenia to become involved with drug addiction. People with schizophrenia have some of the highest rates of addiction. There are a lot of different reasons for that. In my personal case, it was because while I was going to college, I started having hallucinations every single day. I was hearing voices, and I started seeing faceless people in my classrooms, at work, and at home. And that came with not only the auditory and visual hallucinations, but it came with delusion and paranoia. My wife, while I was in college, kind of watched this happen. The unfortunate thing about it is, you can't convince someone who's delusional and paranoid that they're not okay, because then you become part of the paranoia. So I actually believed for a while that my wife, at the time my girlfriend, was trying to poison me. I also had delusion where I thought that I was in a coma from a car accident I was in, and all the voices I was hearing were people trying to help me get out of this coma. And the voices were telling me the only way out was to end this life I was in. So imagine trying to go to school every day, sitting there being distracted by voices from behind you, from in front of you. And the worst part was when my hallucinations started to take form of people I knew, and then started to affect my actual reality. People I was actually talking to, their faces would change, their appearance would change, and it became unbearable to go outside, to go to class, to go to work. And the only way I thought I could get the voices to shut off was using drugs. And it worked briefly, so briefly. And all it did was lead to worsened symptoms, more paranoia, but it was all I thought I had to quiet the voices. The reason that I love being on TikTok and advocating online like that is because I get to make jokes about my schizophrenia. I get to bring light to an otherwise really unfortunate part of my life. And it is something that, if I'm not medicated, it still controls my everyday life. So it was one of those things where I could either make the best of the situation, or I could let it destroy me. And so after college, I wasn't able to continue going. Drug use became the only thing I knew, which led to my incarceration. With that, I also got to see what it was like for mental health in jail and prison systems. I should say the lack of mental health in prison systems, and especially in rural areas such as this, just being able to get mental health care, being able to go and talk to someone about what I was going through. I don't know if anyone here has tried to go talk to a psychiatrist lately. I know to this day, wait times to see someone for suicidal thoughts, for simple things like anxiety, depression, are insane. Which is why I love coming and speaking to people that are actively pursuing careers in nursing, mental health, psychology, because it's needed. If it wasn't for the nurses, the psychologists, the doctors, I wouldn't be here right now. I honestly would not. Without medication, I still have so many issues with my hallucinations. Medication is the only thing that subsides the paranoia and the delusions. Thankfully, the only reason I function day to day is because I only really struggle with hallucinations at this point, both auditory and visual. So what that means is that when I'm at home, and if you've seen my TikTok, you've probably seen, I actually post videos of me having active hallucinations. What that means is I will actually be sitting at home, see someone come in my house. I don't register that they're not someone I know. In my brain, it's like I'm convincing myself that I recognize them or I know them. And I don't know if that's a way of rationalizing it, if that's a way of making myself more comfortable to a really unfortunate situation, but I will actually hear and see things that are not there. And so this leads me into a downward spiral where then the paranoia becomes an issue, and then the delusions also become an issue. As long as I can go day to day without struggling with paranoia and delusions, I can pretty much function. But being able to advocate online allowed me to come out and speak. It allowed me to help people better understand schizophrenia specifically, but mental health in general. Because as college students, a lot of people experience their first psychotic breaks. I remember sitting in a library at Western Technical College, right down the road. And I was having a conversation with someone, and we were getting pretty loud, pretty rowdy, and the librarian walked up, and she looked at me and she basically nicely said, you know, you're being distracting, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. And I said, well, no offense, but what about this guy? She just kind of terrified looked at me and said, there is no one there. It wouldn't be for 2 more years after that incident that I finally started getting treatment. It wasn't until after I had struggled with addiction and went to jail that I realized I needed to get help. And even if I had thought that beforehand, I would have all these thoughts about how stigmatized mental illness is, what I saw my mom go through with her diagnosis, and how people treated her differently because of it. So while I was in jail, I started recognizing that it was an issue and I needed to get help. With being in jail, I didn't have access to drugs anymore. I wasn't able to quiet the voices down. And that's really when I started realizing that the only way for me to get better was to get help. Even though my wife and my mom had been telling me this for 2 years, the paranoia just made me believe that for some reason they were trying to trick me. They were trying to get me locked in a mental institution. So I didn't believe that I had symptoms until I came to terms with it. The most common thing I hear from people that follow me on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, a lot of people ask the same question. They say, how do we help someone if we can tell they're struggling with schizophrenia? And it's an amazing question. I think it says a lot about how society has changed. I think it shows that we care more, but it's an insanely difficult question to answer because when I was in the worst place with my mental illness, my mom, who I knew was a diagnosed schizophrenic, could not convince me that I needed help because it wasn't a matter of me deciding, it was a matter of I was delusional. It didn't matter what she told me. It didn't matter what my wife told me. It didn't matter what my teachers told me. A professor at Western Technical College came up to me in the middle of class one day and said, Cody, you're talking to yourself. I think you need to get help. They became part of my paranoia. I started to think, I can't go to this class now because this teacher is also trying to trick me. When I got out of jail, not only did I have to go through the long process of getting diagnosed, getting medicated, starting treatment, but then I also had this new title. Not only was I a schizophrenic, not only was I a drug addict, but now I was a felon too. I know a lot of you are in college and probably just starting to get some of your first jobs. I'll tell you right now, it's not easy to get a job when you're labeled a felon. It's a lot harder when you start having to throw in mental illness to it, because when I would get a job, I would show up and I would start talking to myself. I'd start talking to someone who wasn't there. Not all employers are very good at being able to help people who are struggling with mental illness. That is why I'm super lucky to be able to do this, but also on the level of employment. I will go in and I'll talk to high-level executives at companies and explain why mental health is so important, why employee assistance programs are so important, because everyone has enough struggles when it comes to getting work, getting employment, but your mental health and the mistakes you've made in the past need to be something that we can put aside if a person is qualified to do a job and able to do a job. Which is why I did start my nonprofit. It is called One Opportunity Hire. It's a nonprofit where we help people with criminal records find jobs, and it's not even necessarily an employment agency. We help with building resumes, we help with providing free suits. We had a partnership for a while with the Salon Professional Academy where they would give free haircuts. Because when you get out of jail or prison, especially if you're someone struggling with mental illness, you forget how to act in society. You forget how to show up for a job interview. You forget you can't go in with shorts and a tank top. So it was really important for me to start my advocacy through not only mental health, but being able to also advocate for people released from jail or prison, because now I was in 2 different subsections of people that were struggling and needed help. And our local area is doing a lot better with resources, but nationwide, we are still struggling, and there's a lot of work to be done. When it comes to me being someone with schizophrenia, people will log on to, the internet, and they'll search YouTube videos of people reacting to like schizophrenic simulations, stuff like that. And I get a lot of questions of what's accurate? Is this video accurate? What do you see? What do you hear? And I don't think people realize the experience I have is going to be different from the experience of anyone else with schizophrenia. I'm not going to see the same things, hear the same things. I'm not going to experience the same delusions. For instance, religious delusions are actually the most common type. I've never struggled with it, fortunately. I've met a few people who have. Religious delusions tend to be someone either thinks they hear God or they think they are God. And my biggest delusion was the delusion I had where I thought I was in a coma. And don't get me wrong, that was difficult to deal with. But when people ask me, is this person really schizophrenic or are they faking it? I'm not one to say that, yes, this person has schizophrenia. I don't know what they experience. I am fortunate enough now to be friends with many other schizophrenic content creators, many other mentally ill content creators. I have been working with bipolar content creators because that is something I don't necessarily understand a lot of, but as someone with a parent with schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, which, like I said, is a combination of schizophrenia and bipolar, it was something I wanted to learn more about. I've also been pairing with more creators that have DID. Does anyone here know what that is? You can say it.
Dissociative identity disorder.
Yes. So it used to be known as multiple personality disorder. It is now dissociative identity disorder. The cool thing about that is I get to use what I've experienced and work with people who have experienced so much different things with mental health, because it's not a one size fits all. It's definitely a spectrum. Same thing with schizophrenia, and the same thing with any mental illness, same thing with depression, anxiety. The reason I love being able to interact with college-age students, though, is because I remember going through my symptoms, going through my hallucinations, my paranoia, and at the time, we didn't really have resources at my school. They have counselors. I believe here I was told you guys also have access to counselors here, which is amazing. Because you're in the age range where men, specifically 18 to 25, that's the most common age range for someone to experience a schizophrenic break. It is a little bit older for women, but it doesn't mean it can't happen in this same age. My mom didn't experience her psychotic break until she was about 30. But like I said, my symptoms started when I was 19, my first semester of my second year, and it was surreal because I can look back and remember a lot of it, but there's so much that people will tell me from that time that I'm like, there's no way that happened. There's no way. I've been told stories about me roaming the streets because I was told to by one of my hallucinations. I've been told stories where I showed up to a class 40 minutes late with no shoes on. I still don't know why. Doesn't make any sense to me. I've been told stories about my addiction. I've been told stories that I just don't understand because it's not me. It wasn't me. Now that I'm medicated, I get to be me again. And that's another really important topic that I get to bring up with not only college-age students, but anyone going through their first psychotic break is, don't let the stigma of medication and treatment be the reason you don't get help. Because no one likes being the 19-year-old kid who has to take antidepressants and antipsychotics. No one likes that. No one likes telling their friends, hey, I can't go hang out, I have to go to a counseling appointment, a psychiatry appointment. No one likes saying, hey, I can't go out drinking tonight, I have to take some time for my mental health. It's been one day after another and I need to take a break. And the unfortunate part of it is, if you're not prioritizing mental health, especially when you have so much additional stress, going to college is the first time that you're on your own. You're doing all of these things you've never had to do before, and then on top of that, you're adding in the stress of mental health. Now, I flunked out of college my first time, so I don't really remember a lot about finals. But I do remember, since I had to come back recently, that they're incredibly stressful. And there's things you can be doing to prioritize mental health, because even if you think you're completely fine, you could be struggling. I thought I was fine for 2 years. And it takes everything to not wish that I would have known sooner, but that was part of my experience. That was part of me being able to tell my story. So, for anyone in here who does follow me on TikTok, you guys have probably seen that my videos that have done super well are 2 different types. The ones where I'm making jokes about schizophrenia, because who doesn't like joking about their trauma, let's be honest. And then the videos of me posting actual footage of me having symptoms. And I think that's super important to point out, because I've thought a lot about why that is. Obviously, like I said, everyone copes with trauma different ways. I use comedy, makes me feel better about it. I get to look back and make jokes at coworkers, friends, family. Specifically, schizophrenic jokes, because that is the only type I know. And then I also get to use my experience as a motivator for others. So I do get to use, the terrible things I've seen and heard as a way to help other people suffering to maybe understand what they're going through. And that is super cool. Even if I have to do it through comedy, even if I have to make a joke and someone's able to relate it back to what they're feeling or what they're seeing or what they're hearing, and be able to think, all right, well, this is funny, but maybe I do need help. The other type of video with me having active symptoms, I think is really important, because even if you're not struggling with mental health, a lot of people are fascinated by disorders they don't understand. So I get a lot of people who comment, not to sound weird, but your brain really intrigues me. And I don't think it's weird, because like I said, I have content creators and friends who have DID, and I do not understand DID at all. I find it really fascinating. That's why I'm going to be collaborating more with people that struggle with it, the people that struggle with bipolar disorder, because I don't understand it. So being able to share those videos was super hard for me, but I feel like it's been the most effective in my advocacy journey, because now people get to see what you don't see. People get to see me struggling actively in the time. They get to see me talking to hallucinations that aren't there. They get to see me literally looking at someone who is not in the room with me. And then they get to ask themselves really big questions like, why wouldn't he rationalize that there's not some guy in his house? Why would he not think it's weird that he's seen multiple people in his house when it's just him and his wife? Why is he not questioning that he's hearing multiple voices but he doesn't see anyone? So they get to look into it more. They get to understand it better. And then, like I said earlier, they get to put a different face to the word schizophrenia. So that's kind of my goal, is that when you guys leave, I want you to be able to think about schizophrenia as an illness that may cause people to struggle but isn't inherently dangerous. Another cool aspect of me doing this full time is that I get to do CIT training, which is crisis intervention training, specifically with police officers and with law enforcement, because one of the biggest issues is how police respond to mental health calls. I have a really unfortunate story involving police and mental health calls. There has been a time where the cops were called on me because I was in a store talking to myself, and some woman assumed I was using drugs and that I was going to be a danger to myself or others. So I did have the cops called on me for that, and that wasn't the first or last time that would happen. So I think one of the things that this allows me to do is raise more awareness, help people better understand that just because someone's struggling doesn't mean you understand what they're struggling with. I don't ever care for the amount of hate comments I get online, but as someone who is a full-time social media person, that kind of comes with the territory. And a lot of the negative comments I get are specifically about how I choose to cope. So I get a lot of, unfortunately, negative comments from other people with schizophrenia that don't care to see me making jokes of it. And I understand that, absolutely. But we also need to understand that people are going to use their platforms to advocate for things differently, whether it's on social media, whether it's going and speaking to local legislators, whether it's speaking to higher ups at your employment or at your school. Because everyone has the opportunity to advocate, even if it's not on a huge level. And my favorite thing is being able to come to events like this, talk about my symptoms, talk about all that, but then get to leave hearing that several people are advocating. They started a NAMI group at their college, or they, went to their advisors and said, hey, we need to have on-site counselors because I've been to schools that don't have them. And so the biggest thing I would like from my advocacy is just a better understanding of schizophrenia and mental illness. I remember shortly after my diagnosis that I had to tell people, right? And so before I was ever TikTok famous, before I ever advocated online, I had to go through this process of, telling people I have schizophrenia. I remember the first person I told, obviously, was my wife, and I was devastated because I had this new label, and that's the last thing I wanted, because I already have so many labels. But like she told me, she said, we kind of knew this was coming, your mom also has schizophrenia, it's unfortunate, but now you can get treatment and now you can get medication. And so I was able to start doing that. Then I had to start telling people in the real world, because unfortunately with my symptoms, I can't always hide them. I currently work a job where if I start having hallucinations, everyone around me knows how to identify it now. They know what to look for, including my managers and my bosses, and I'm able to work at a place that allows me to leave as needed, which is why it's so important to not only advocate at your school, but to advocate at your workplace. Even if it's anxiety or depression, being able to help your coworkers, your managers, better understand what you're dealing with allows them to be able to advocate for you as your bosses, as your friends, because we spend more time with our coworkers than we do with our family, a lot of jobs. So being able to do that allows you to have a little more control of your everyday life. And so advocacy has become this weird thing where I thought I was going to be doing it only online, but when you're advocating for mental health, it is your everyday life. It's what I struggle with, it's what I talk about, it's what I post about. And so the unique side of that is that I get to think about it a lot, and I get to talk to people a lot. I get to have really good conversations. One of the things I look forward to the most, and even tonight, is Q&A, because some of the best thought-provoking questions I've had have come from universities and colleges, because a lot of the people in your guys' position are maybe starting to come to terms with the fact that they are struggling in some sort of way, or they know someone who is struggling and they want to figure out how to help that person. I also, unfortunately, get to talk to people a lot about the addiction aspect of my mental illness and my mental health. Because addiction in itself is a mental health issue. And so when I started using drugs and I started talking about my past use of drugs and alcohol, there's always that argument that people try to make, well, you made the decision to start using drugs. Sure. But I didn't make the decision to start having hallucinations and try to quiet them. It wasn't something I thought about doing. It was something that happened, and I unfortunately turned to drugs as a way to cope. Is that right? Absolutely not. But to point a finger at me and say, this is your fault now that you're addicted to this drug because you chose to use it, completely overlooks the fact that the reason I started using drugs was because of my mental health. Most people that are using drugs aren't just using it for fun. It's a way to cope with your mental health. It's a way to deal with mental illness specifically. A large amount of people who struggle with addiction also struggle with mental illness. And one of the things I always say, if you've seen any of my content, my TikTok, my YouTube, my podcast, you're probably sick of hearing me say this, but in jail and prison systems, there are more people in need of mental health care and recovery counseling than there are actual bad people who need to be in jail and prison. But don't get me wrong, there are bad people out there. I met a lot of them when I was in jail. But a majority of people are just struggling. They've made mistakes, they want to do better, and then they get out, and it's very hard to do that because you have all these labels. You have to go get treated, and if you don't get treated, and you don't get that label, well then you're still struggling. It's a never-ending cycle, it seems like, which is why I always love seeing people advocate, because then they get to take the trauma that they've had, they get to take the things they've been through, whether it's addiction, whether it's PTSD, whether it's any sort of mental illness, and they get to turn it into a positive. Which, if anyone here has a family member or friend who struggles with mental illness or addiction, the outcome could be a lot worse. Brings me to the toughest thing I have to talk about, which is suicidal thoughts and tendencies. Suicide is one of the worst parts of my job because I have to talk about it a lot. It's something I've struggled with, and it's something that I find out so many people struggle with and either choose to hide or choose to keep quiet. Even if you aren't actively making a plan, having those thoughts are not normal. And in my brain, I thought it was normal. No part of me thought there was an issue with the thoughts I was having because I was hallucinating, I was delusional, and it just didn't make sense to be alive anymore. Which is why I turned to drugs and why I chose to do what I was doing, but the outcome could have been a lot worse. And so, obviously, we are very fortunate in this day and age where there are a lot of resources. We have suicide hotlines, we have counselors at our school, which is huge. We have EAP programs. If you're struggling and you're working somewhere, almost every single company has an EAP program where you can reach out to someone, you can talk to someone, and it's not easy. It's really not easy going in and telling someone you're struggling because then you have to admit it to yourself. And that's probably the hardest part, not telling it to someone, but admitting it to yourself. When I finally came to terms with the fact that I was having issues, I didn't care that I had to go into a room and tell some lady that I was struggling. I cared because that means if I say it out loud, it's true. If I start bringing it to the forefront of my mind, all of a sudden it's real. But the options are either address it and take care of it or suffer. And so, like I said, we live in a day and age where there are so many ways that you guys can get help. You can talk to people, and friends and family can also be a huge help to that because there are programs for them as well. So chances are that someone that you're close to, if you told them what you were struggling with, would be able to at least point you in the right direction of help. But like I said, it's not about telling that person, it's about coming to terms with it yourself. I do want to just take a little time to break down individual symptoms of my schizophrenia. I like to do this just as a way for, obviously, making you guys more aware of what schizophrenia can look like as an individual. So, the symptoms I've struggled with, and this is just me personally, are auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations, paranoia, and delusions. There are more symptoms that come with schizophrenia. These are just the ones most prevalent with me. Now, when I was diagnosed with undifferentiated schizophrenia. As far as I know now, schizophrenia is a spectrum. So they diagnose it as schizophrenia, and you are just somewhere on the spectrum. When I was diagnosed, and it was different types, there was undifferentiated, paranoid schizophrenia, catatonic schizophrenia, and disorganized schizophrenia. And so what undifferentiated schizophrenia means was that I showed symptoms of every type. It was basically the perfect spectrum that we have now. It was just me being put onto this spectrum of schizophrenia, which is why I do prefer to just say I have schizophrenia instead of going into that old diagnosis of undifferentiated schizophrenia. But the primary issues I deal with, like I said, are hallucinations and delusions, and I want to break down what that was like before medication and now after medication. Before medication, my paranoia and delusions were my main issue. But the hallucinations and the auditory and visual hallucinations changed a lot after I got medicated. If you guys are learning about medication, you'll know that there are tons of side effects. Not every medication is going to work the same for each person. And so it's a lot of trial and error. And it can be a really long process, and it causes people to stop taking meds altogether, which causes a lot of issues down the road if they go right back through the same cycle they were going through. For me, I was very fortunate that I did stay on medication. I just kind of toughed it out. I had a lot of symptoms. We changed up medication regimens. We found different medications to deal with side effects from the current medications. I am on 6 or 7 daily medications now. And like I said earlier, no one wants to be that 25-year-old guy. How old am I now? 27? 27-year-old guy who is on 6 different medications. But it's the reason I get to stand here in front of you and I'm not sitting in a psych ward right now. With my hallucinations specifically, I used to hear a lot more negative voices. I used to hear a lot louder voices. So when people see videos that I've posted where I'm having hallucinations, one of the most common questions I get asked is, why take medication if you're still gonna have symptoms? It's a valid question. It was the same question I asked myself 6 months into taking medications when I was still having symptoms. And that's one of the things I try to advocate for now, is letting people know that it's not a cure-all. You have to put in the work on your side too. So like, they don't just go away. The fortunate thing is, I have less of them. I don't hallucinate 24/7 anymore. When I do hallucinate, it's fairly normal voices. Are they still negative sometimes? Absolutely. But I get a lot more just chatter in my brain, honestly. When I do have hallucinations, they're not faceless people anymore. They're not terrifying like they used to be. I used to literally see faceless people in my home and what I would refer to as demons because I couldn't describe them any other way to you. It is impossible to live day to day seeing those types of things. Seeing those things integrated into your perception of reality. Now with medication, do I have visual hallucinations? Absolutely. But they're typically just regular people. And not everyone I know with schizophrenia has had that sort of change. But fortunately with me, we got to the point where we could either keep experimenting with medication or accept that I can function day to day. I have symptoms a couple times a week, maybe once a week now. And you will see that if you follow my content. I post videos when I'm struggling. I'll go live on social media when I'm struggling. And the reason for that is it's a distraction. It helps me cope. It helps me be able to deal with what I see and hear. But treatment saved me. Medication saved me. And so the symptoms that you're gonna learn about with schizophrenia, the paranoia, the delusions, the hallucinations, even with medication, some people are gonna have to endure those. But the best part of it is being able to live with it, being able to function day to day, and being able to become an advocate, helping people understand. And so I always just like to leave you guys with an open-ended thought process of what can you do to learn more? Not necessarily about schizophrenia. If there's something you or something you know are struggling with, what can you do to learn more about it? Follow people on social media? Sure. Read more? Sure. But you can also talk to other people around you, because chances are someone you know is struggling and they are probably not aware of it. So it's not harmful in any way to open up that dialogue. And just be able to have those communications. And if it's someone who likes to joke about their trauma, I mean, if that's the way to communicate with them, that's how I've connected with over 1 million people online. Never in a million years did I think I would be doing motivational speaking or news interviews about internet fame for being mentally ill. But you make the best of what you get, and I just hope that if you guys are struggling, you reach out to the right people. I want to thank you guys for allowing me to come in and talk to you guys. I do know we have some time set aside for Q&A, but if you have any questions, please do not be afraid to ask. If you are too shy to ask, because I get this a lot, where I'll have Q&A and then people will message me afterwards, that is absolutely fine. You guys can either message me on Instagram. I try to go through Instagram direct messages all the time. Otherwise, I do have an email that I will leave with Kayla here that you guys can definitely reach out to me on as well. I do want to specify before that I'm not a medical professional. All I can do is offer ways to find support, but I am definitely available if anyone is looking for any sort of resources, anything like that. But thanks again for letting me come and chat with you guys. I do appreciate it.